Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Cameron Naylor and I'm your host for this set of fireside chats as part of the Open Publishing Fest, coming to you in all time zones and in all media and online platforms around the world these 2 weeks. I'm coming to you from Perth, Western Australia, where I'm on Whadjuk Noongar lands, and I'd like to acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging, and their continuing connection with the land. On this chat today, my guest is Daniella Lowenburg, who's based at the California Digital Library at the University of California, where she runs the product development team for Dryad, the data repository, directs the Making Data Count initiative, and co-founded the Force 11 Research Data Publishing Ethics Working Group. Breathe. So that's quite a lot happening. Daniella, welcome to the chat. And can you tell us a little bit about the Force 11 Working Group, why you founded it and what it's doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Force 11 Working Group was one of those things where for years it seemed like there's something missing. We really need someone to just take the time to think about publishing ethics and research integrity for data as data publishing becomes this norm that we're all working towards. And finally, it became imminent that it had to happen now. Cases are coming up at repositories. We start to hear about these ethical and legal issues coming up. And so it was very exciting to work with a former coworker, Aracha Puebla, who was at PLOS with me. And we decided to launch the working group. And we decided to do it through Force because we needed it to be a group of people that represented every stakeholder that could possibly touch a data set with an integrity or ethics issue. And so we actually started by first making sure we had 7 of us who really cared about this from different angles. So different data repositories, publishers, making sure that it was federal data repositories and general institutions, libraries. And we started to realize that what we really needed was basically COPE recommendations and flowcharts for data. And luckily, Aracha has been so involved in COPE that we were able to make it so that it's a joint Force and COPE working group. And we have 70 members on it now, and we just published our first recommendations. And I can give a plug for the Force conference that's coming up in a few weeks. We're going to do an hour deep dive into all the recommendations, but they're really for how repositories, libraries, institutions, and publishers can recommended guidance for what they can do if a published data set has ethical or legal issues. So around risk, so to participants, to communities, concerns about scientific rigor, authorship disputes, and legal things. And so it's kind of just a starting point to get folks thinking about this. But it's really fun, and it's kind of an emerging area. So if folks are interested, they should come join the work.
So that's what you're doing at the moment, but I'm guessing when you were growing up, you didn't think you'd be working in research data ethics. What were you interested in doing, and what led you into this path?
I've been told that when I was growing up, I really wanted to be a mail woman, and I don't know why, but clearly I didn't go down that path. I was really interested in high school. I wanted to be like my dad, who was a surgeon. So I would spend as much time as I could get out of class with credits to go shadow in surgery. I thought everything about the operating room was so cool, and I wanted to do that. And then in college, once I started studying infectious disease, I was also watching a lot of TV shows that are like hospital based, and knowing too much about infectious disease and watching that, I was getting really bad anxiety. And I was like, patient care is not for me. And so none of really what I thought I was going to be doing is what I went into.
I guess, and that led you sort of from the wet lab work you were doing on infectious diseases into a dry lab setting. So tell us a little bit about that transition and how that worked for you.
Yeah, so I feel like the theme of my career so far is that I've always been about the underdog. And so I wanted to get into research on disease that was kind of underfunded. And I was doing antibiotic resistance research at the California State Public Health on gonorrhea, which doesn't seem like that's an underfunded thing. Turns out antibiotic resistance on it there wasn't a whole lot of research going into it, but it just took a lot of gene sequencing to understand where's this resistance, where's it coming from, how is it affecting different populations. And I was presented with an opportunity after that to go to Stanford and curate pharmacogenomic pathways on chemotherapy agents, which was a very new area because my background was in microbiology, gene sequencing, but I wanted to take on the challenge. And about a year into that, realizing that, curation of pathways and doing literature reviews was just not for me. I am very extroverted. I like to engage with people. I'm a huge advocate. And so I was like, I love microbiology, I love science, but I don't think this is the move.
So I guess that was what then led you to your next role.
Yeah, also curating pathways was a lot of doing literature reviews. And even while being at Stanford, so you have full access to publisher deals, I started to understand what paywalls were, and it started to really frustrate me. And so I started looking around and thinking, what are other ways? I really like writing. I really like talking about science. Saw that PLOS had an opening and happened to be like blocks from where I was living. Who knew? And so I wanted to start to get into the open access movement and started at PLOS in 2013.
Yep. And when you arrived, there was something pretty big happening at the time.
Yeah, it was like my second or third week. I had no experience in publishing, but we're sitting in an all staff meeting for PLOS One, learning about the first time that they were saying, we're going to do the PLOS open data policy. This is the thing that we're going to be leaders in. And my ears kind of perked up because they were saying there's already standards in some fields like microarray and gene sequencing, and sitting in as the newbie in the room, not knowing anything about what else was talking about. I was like, that's the thing that I should help with. That's what I should get involved in. And so while I was generally working on PLOS One, my big emphasis was implementing the data policy at PLOS One, which sounds really like managerial, but honestly, it meant checking every data statement for every single PLOS One submission that came in, and opening the files and seeing if reviewers looked at anything, and just tinkering for years to figure out what does an implementation actually look like on the ground, and just building up a team to be able to handle that, which of course is then how I started to understand the world of data. Although maybe a little biased from a publisher angle, but at least it started getting me interested in the general data scope.
I mean, so we're talking sort of 2013, 2014, 2015 now, which, although it may not seem it is quite some time ago. Can you take us a little bit back to what the landscape was around publishing at the time, and what was it about, what options were there for publishing data, and what was it about the PLOS policy that made it significant?
Yeah, it's so interesting because I think we really thought that this was like the biggest thing to happen. And when I actually left and started working in the roles I'm in now, it was almost embarrassing for me to not understand that there's been this whole world of data. And that publishers were really just getting in, but data sharing was actually a thing in so many fields. And there were journal communities that had picked up on it, for instance, in ecology and evolution, environmental biology. And so PLOS wasn't the first journal to do this, but it was important to be able to show at scale. And it was during PLOS One's peak. What is it that you could do with data? And I think the difference now looking back is we called success just having data statements. And I could go on for hours about how that should not be our emphasis and focus. And that is not success right now. And so we were really thrilled to just even have data be a thing. And I know that it's stepwise. But really now looking back, there's so much that needs to keep moving. And I do feel like we're still stuck in a space where in the publishing world, data statements, data in SI files without data citations, with data not being in curated repositories, we're still kind of at that level, and not all journals have data policies even. So there's part of me that's like, we've moved so much, and then part of me that's like, maybe we haven't moved at all right now.
And I guess, I mean, clearly you're an advocate for data sharing and better data policy, but you've also been involved in advocacy around open access and legislation.
Yeah, that was so I feel like I've always, when I was saying underdog, it was like anything that I could like really root for. Growing up, I was thinking about like, where did this advocacy come from? And then remembered that as a, like maybe from when I was 8 until high school, I was always wanting to be like the advocate on student council. And I'm also really short. And so I had a really good slogan, which was "Don't be a wimp, vote for the shrimp." And it won me all the elections. And so I was thinking, you know, like, where did this come from? And realized, oh, it's because I've always just wanted to be like super loud about something. And so PLOS was really big in advocacy. Obviously, you were a part of this. And fortunately, being in California, when I was there, it was when AB 609 was going through, which was the bill for open access that got cut down to be just about public health. But it was an awesome experience starting to work with Spark and all the other organizations in this that cared about furthering the OA movement, not just through specifically funders or institutions, but like policy, higher level. How can we make some systematic change?
And so in your current role, you moved in 2017 to the California Digital Library. Tell us a little bit about that shift and the work you're doing with Dryad and how that fits into this broader data landscape.
Yeah. So I was brought over to UC, really fortunate to be able to join the California Digital Library team. And I was really supposed to be focused on just data publishing, you know, kind of open-ended. So working with the UCs and other, and overseeing a platform at that point that was a data repository just for UC. And trying, you know, first step was, how do you get people to publish their data? And also, how do you bridge all these gaps? I remember one of the first things that I did when I got there and started meeting all the UC folks and the data librarians was, oh my gosh, there's such a gap that at the publisher, we're saying available data being available upon request is fine, have the institution handle it. And then you look at the institution and the institution's like, we have no way to handle this data. We, at this point in 2017, there was really nothing for holding sensitive data and being able to do access to that. And so I remember one of the first things I did was just like set up a conversation. I'm like, libraries, publisher, we got to talk about this. But then it was also, okay, data can be made available. Why should you use this UC data publishing platform? And UC researchers every time, even if I bribed them with coffee or whatever, was, well, I'm just going to go where the publisher or my funder tells me to go. I don't know about this. And my lab uses Dryad or my lab uses Figshare. And so we started to think about it and to better meet UC's needs and better meet researcher needs in general. We partnered with Dryad in 2018. And so that really changed up the role and the remit. And so I've been product managing for Dryad. And I think the big focus really is, you know, Dryad has great adoption. Dryad has all these relationships with journals and funders, but how do you make things as easy as possible for researchers, but in a meaningful way? We could make it as easy as uploading a supporting information file, but who cares if the data is not usable? So it's this balance of researcher needs, but us building for what we think the needs are going forward. And so it's an interesting space to be in right now.
And I guess, yeah, it's a question of being far enough out ahead to help the next step, but not so far out ahead that you lose people along the way. And I guess that relates to the Making Data Count project as well. Can you tell us a little bit about that project?
Yeah, Make Data Count started in 2014, actually from colleagues that were at PLOS at the time. So, you know, shout out to the original Carly Strasser, whose project this was. And we've been able to turn it into an initiative that's really focused on the development of open data metrics. So, you know, not prescribing right now, what are those? We don't know what the right metrics are for data. And we were really focused on infrastructure for the last years. What is the infrastructure that's needed to be able to do data usage and data citation? And where we understand we really need to be is that everyone wants open data to be involved in research assessment. Caveat, everyone who is into open data wants it to be involved in research assessment. But we can't have it in research assessment. We can't have credit for data. We can't have reward for data until we have some way to even evaluate and understand that impact. And we're at a really exciting time because while we don't have that, and that's frustrating, we actually get to create it responsibly. So in the publishing world, folks are kind of working backwards. We have these metrics we don't want, impact factor and H-index. Now let's work backwards and try and do something else. But with us for data right now, we get to build up and we can do it right and we can make them evidence-based. And so a lot of our work, so importantly right now, is with bibliometricians that are able to start to understand and do studies on what could be right for different disciplines. And data, we're not going to have a metric that just works for all data, just like it doesn't work for articles. And so a lot of this right now is focusing on different disciplines, what can be right, a lot of advocacy to make sure that people are doing their part for the building blocks, like standardizing data usage. Everyone should be supporting data citation. It's still not happening. That needs to change. And that's not to say that we think data citation is going to be the cure-all necessarily. It just means that everyone needs to start doing their part right now so that we can get to a place where we can understand what is right. But right now, to be able to say data citation is credit, it just doesn't work because we don't even have an understanding of how many data citations exist. And so there's so much work to be done, but it's a really timely initiative. It's been timely for a decade, but now folks are starting, and this is what I was saying, just a data statement isn't enough. None of this works until we have a way to evaluate it.
And does that, you spoke earlier about making data sharing meaningful to researchers, and now we've moved to evaluating, and there's obviously a connection there, but are you seeing that happen? Is this becoming something that is more meaningful to researchers, and how does that really relate to this day-to-day around evaluation and I guess tracking?
I think we're caught in a chicken and egg situation. I think we're all trying to say data reuse is important. Researchers think data reuse is important. People want, if they're going to make it available, to know that something happened with it. And yet we're still in a place where it's like, what's going to happen first? And so things are really tricky, I guess, right now with that. And I think what can drive it forward is everyone that's kind of on the infrastructure and advocacy and policy side to really resource and emphasize where we actually want to be. Because there's it's just stuck. What's the incentive for someone to make their data super meaningful, super useful right now if they're not going to be credited or rewarded later? But also if no one's going to actually check that they did this. If it's just to check a box, then that's that. So there's a lot of work to be done around meaningful submissions and making reuse a norm, and then being able to reward on both sides of that.
So as you said, there is a lot more to be done here. What do you think is the most important thing to come, and what are you hoping to get into in the future?
I think that being in this space and caring about data, there's two big things that need to happen going forward, or what I would want to be involved in, which is understanding how data can, sorry, also everyone was like never do a nighttime thing, and it's nighttime in California now. So the first is understanding, what open data has done. Not just having like one random story that we all refer to of how an open data set influenced a field. It needs to become so routine that we can actually understand what it's all leading to. We can keep publishing data and, hundreds of thousands of data sets being made available each year, but what are they leading to? What are the discoveries? And so understanding reuse, understanding how data is bettering society and all of that is really important. And make data count. There's a lot of that there. And then I think the second thing is that we need to start thinking about research data working with other data. So administrative data, governmental data, industry and private data, it all needs to come together, because I'm not in this because it's just scientific discovery. The point is that we want a better society. We want to advance society. We can't do that if we only look at research data in silo. So we have to start thinking about how research data can be made available in a way that we can work with administrative data about policy, that we can use industry data. We are not the only ones who care about data as research supporting folks. Data is the commodity in the industry. And so we need to be thinking about how we can actually figure out solutions and discovery and have evidence behind new policies, et cetera, when these data are actually being used together, and not just, oh, look at this data set in silo and what it did. We have to be more dynamic going forward.
So what's the one key message you'd like to leave people with?
There's so many. The one key message is that data is a priority right now. As I say, like industry, everyone else knows that. So we got to move fast. But the priority right now are things that may sound boring. Truly infrastructure for data and infrastructure around restricted access to data, around reuse of data, around credit and assessment and all the make data count stuff, the ethics, that's all infrastructure, all of those standards. And so it really is going to take us not just as a community saying, oh, open data is a success. Look how much data is published every year and look at these data policies. We have to think forward to actually all investing in and prioritizing, just like the publishing world, has a big hot topic. This needs to be that, and not just a side conversation, and not just, the data world talking about it over here saying, why don't people listen? As a scholarly communications, as publishers, we all have to be prioritizing things, even if it sounds not that fun, but the infrastructure for data, because if we don't do it now, we're not going to get past this point. And so it really just takes everyone to step in and implement best practices. Don't compete when you don't need to. Join communities of practice and promote those. Do things open source where you can. All of that, and just start building data up, because we're just otherwise going to be stuck in this question of, are we further along than we were in 2013?
Well, that sounds like a great call to arms to end on. So thank you, Daniella, for being my guest on this fireside chat. The Open Publishing Fest continues for the rest of this week. You can find the schedule online at openpublishingfest.org. There are events around the time zones of very many different types. So you'll find something there both for your time and for your interests, I hope. With that, hope you have a good day, whether you're catching this live or delayed telecast, as it were. Thank you once again, Daniella, and we'll see you later.